It is the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the birthplace of Jesus. From Genesis to Revelation, Israel is the centerpiece of God's story, a saga that continues to unfold in our daily news. But behind the headlines are the people caught in the crosshairs of some really complex issues. It can be hard to see clearly from the outside, so let's explore my homeland from within. Jerusalem, once considered the center of the world, this ancient city has been laid into the foundations of three major religions. For centuries, the Holy Land has attracted a diverse and devout population of Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Today, Jerusalem is home to layer upon layer of history, tradition, and complexity. Within her iconic walls, we find an endless maze of culture, religion, and nationality. Yet beneath these dividing lines, there lies common ground, the sacred city. Let's strip away the layers and explore Jerusalem at her foundations.
We are going to see part of the gates of the Tower of David fortress, the tallest point in the old city. You can see the central part of the turret with gigantic stones built here by Herod the Great, about 2,000 years old. Below it, Crusader, that added more fortification around it, 800 years old. And you have the Turkish edition all the way up, which is 500 years old. So a Jewish tower surrounded by a Christian fortification, and the upper part is Muslim. Jerusalem is a big, complicated layer cake.
Jerusalem is right at the edge of the desert, and it's very much defined by the lack of water. Just on the other side of this mountain is where the desert begins. The conflict with the desert perhaps makes it a city of conflict, a city of tensions, of survival. Jerusalem is a city that is trying to survive. When I decided to look into Jerusalem's oldest libraries and archives, going back to the early Middle Ages, I discovered the city of true exchange. If you travel Jerusalem holding a guidebook from the Middle Ages in Arabic, a Muslim guide, it mentions many sites that are important to Christians as sites that are also important to Muslims. So Jerusalem as a meeting point for all three monotheistic religions.
This city is old, very old. It started somewhere in the early Bronze Age, and it continued throughout all the different ages of history: Iron Age, First Temple period, Second Temple period, Roman, Byzantine, Arab, Crusader, Mamluk, Turkish, and those are just the main periods. Christianity, Islam, and Judaism left their mark more than anyone else. The Christian quarter is all around the beautiful domes of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Muslim quarter is around Temple Mount and the shining golden dome, Dome of the Rock. And the Jewish quarter is around its main shrine, the Hurva Synagogue, with the white famous dome.
There's so much that has been influenced by the religions affecting one another. It's the religious practice that was copied from one community into another. The most symbolic building of the Dome of the Rock, the place which is the foundation of the Jewish religion in Jerusalem, which is also the most important place for Islam in Jerusalem.
Many people believe that the Western Wall is the holiest place for the Jews on earth, which is almost true. The holiest of the holiest is actually below the Dome of the Rock. We call it the foundation stone. This is where the binding of Isaac was, where we believe that the creation of the world started, therefore the foundation stone. Today, the famous Dome of the Rock, which is a Muslim shrine protecting the rock that is also holy for Islam, because they believe that the binding of Ishmael was there, and where Muhammad was ascended to heaven to meet God, and he came back with the 5 principal prayers of Islam. You can understand that this place is quite complicated as well, for it's holy for everybody.
The Dome of the Rock was built on a site of the Jewish temple, but it also copies the building that was most important at the time that it was built, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Muslims who came to Jerusalem looked around and saw the most amazing building in the city and decided to build something that was even more beautiful. In the 10th century, the Jerusalemite historian Muqaddasi explains to us it was intentional to build a more beautiful building. One clear symbol is the size of the dome. The 2 buildings have an exact same size dome, which shows you there is a dialogue between the 2 buildings.
Famous Western Wall, the retaining wall of what used to be the great Jewish temple. We're looking at the ruins of the second temple. The Temple of Solomon was much smaller and completely swallowed by the second one. I can think of Yeshua, Jesus of Nazareth, coming to visit the same spot, only he walked down below where the people are today, and he went up and into Temple Mount through one of the gates to visit the temple itself.
Christianity was born out of Judaism. Jesus was a Jew. The same Mount of Olives is a place where Jesus came into the city, but also the place where he walked out of the city. Jesus looked back at Jerusalem and gave the prophecy. He started crying and said, "There is not going to be left one stone upon the other." The year 70, the destruction of the temple, was a horrible moment for the Jews, but also for Christians. Christians looked at it and said Jesus was a true prophet. That moment was fundamental to Christian thinking about Jerusalem. All of Jesus' followers, they were asking themselves, what does it mean? And can we bring Christianity, or the new form of Jewish practices that have accepted Christianity, into the world? Can we include in that people who are not Jews? First person to deal with that was St. Paul. He's the one who said, absolutely, Christianity is not just for Jews, it's also for the Gentiles. It's funny to think about it today in this way, because it seems so far apart. Christianity had to be just for Jews. Gethsemane is one of the sites in Jerusalem that I like most. It has those really old trees. The main power of the place is actually the trees themselves. Over 1,000 years old, probably almost 2,000 years old. And you see exactly what St. Paul was talking about. The roots of the old tree, parts of it are completely dry, but it has new shoots coming out of it. And he thought about it as a great metaphor for the relationship between Christianity and Judaism. Christianity will not live without its basis in the Jewish roots. And Judaism would be very much, for him, would die without having the new shoots that were Christianity in his mind.
This city is full of limestones, and by the law, even the most modern buildings must be built only from limestone or to be covered by them. Somebody just stuck, probably just to use it as part of the foundation, some beautiful chiseled comb and the Corinthian crown. Somebody's decorations are now part of somebody's external wall. That's very Jerusalem, construction and destruction. So from the Christian quarter to the Jewish quarter.
They started by being Jews. They accepted Christianity. They separated from the Jewish community. Judeo-Christian, this is what we call them. The feeling towards Jerusalem is very complex because there is this foundation, the layer where Jesus said that there is not going to be left one stone upon the other. Are we allowed to build Jerusalem or are we not allowed to build Jerusalem? Is an important question that Christians have to ask themselves. And they did. And it was not until Queen Helen, the mother of Constantine, came to Jerusalem and started building here that Christianity invested physically in the city. Christianity had a lot to deal with. First of all, because it was incredible in its size. In Jerusalem, we find the most important moments in the split of the church, which is important until today, happened in the year 451. All the way from Egypt, through Syria, into Lebanon, through Turkey and Armenia. All these people who believed we must think of Christ primarily as a divine, but the whole of Europe felt differently. The Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church was combined in the feeling that we must think about Christ as having two natures. That question divided Christianity in the year 451. The world had split, and it affected Christianity from that moment to a degree that the churches, the people, the communities were not able to pray together.
Look at all the limestone puzzle of so many different periods. Many people do ask me, who built this? The answer would be probably everybody. Everyone wants to build something in Jerusalem. Just imagine buying something in the market and then you need to schlep up all the plastic bags through that, time and again.
Jerusalem was known in Arabic as Beit el-Maqdas, which in Hebrew means Beit HaMikdash, the house of the temple. People often talk about the Dome of the Rock as the most beautiful building in Jerusalem, but if you look beyond the beauty into the texts written on it, right at eye level, you can read inside the building that was founded in 691 AD, a text about Christianity. In the circle around from the inside, you see the text talks about the Trinity and about Jesus. And the reason it's there is because the Muslims were dealing with the religion that existed here already. And they were asking themselves, could you have a Trinity and it still be a monotheistic religion? They thought that it was challenging the very premise of the monotheistic religion. So they said, no, you cannot say three, there is only one God. What's interesting about the Dome of the Rock is that these lines were written before the Quran was even edited, before it was completed. So you have very old text in the building of the Dome of the Rock, predating the final indexing and editing of the Quran. The liberation of Jerusalem by the Crusaders became one of the most important moments in the history of Christianity. The Crusaders came here and lived here and created a kingdom here. They rebuilt Jerusalem and had the walls reconstructed. They built churches all over. All of them exist until today. If you walk into the city, you can find those monuments. They're amazing. But how come the popes never came here? It was only 60 years ago that the Pope came to Jerusalem for the first time. This is exactly the duality that Christianity has with Jerusalem.
So instead of walking through the crowded Arab bazaar, we'll walk above it, through some of those little alleyways.
Unlike Judaism that was so focused on pilgrimage to Jerusalem, on making Jerusalem the holy city, Christianity moved on from that, thinking, actually, we don't have to be, we're not bound by a particular place. There's no need to sacrifice anything in a temple. They could break that bondage to the place, to Jerusalem, and could go all over the world.
There are more than 25,000 people living in the old city, an area that is slightly bigger than 1 square mile. And you can barely find an empty apartment here.
This was a place where communities, especially the Christian communities, that came here from all over the world and settled here and developed here, and left behind them great heritage that still exists here. At the top of the Mount of Olives, you can see the Church of the Ascension, right at the highest building in the horizon. And inside that church, you can find the oldest existing Armenian inscription in the world. We also have the oldest existing inscription in Georgian in the world, in Jerusalem. This is, for me, is what makes Jerusalem such a wonderful place and such an extraordinary place. Because now the Russians are the ones who are keeping the Armenian inscriptions, because the Franciscans are the ones who take care of the Georgian inscriptions. In all the libraries, the Greeks would have material in Ge'ez, written by the Ethiopians who brought it over in the Middle Ages when they moved into Jerusalem. The oldest Christian communities in Jerusalem are the Palestinian Christians. People sometimes forget when they come to Jerusalem, they look at the sites, everyone goes to the Holy Sepulchre, everyone goes to visit various biblical sites, but they forget that the people themselves are so fascinating and that they have been here since the time of Jesus. Very little research has been done on those really old families of Jerusalem. Christians are being persecuted throughout the Middle East. There's no doubt that this is a tragedy for the Christian population that has lived here continuously since the time of Jesus. The Christian population, by decreasing in number, is now forced to come together in a way that the communities were not able to do beforehand, finding practices that allow them to bridge over the big gaps that were created over the years between the Christian denominations. It's more than a symbol that Pope Francis came to Jerusalem with the Patriarch of Constantinople to pray together that Christianity will be united again in Jerusalem. The gap between the communities for thousands of years is finally beginning to be bridged. Isn't it amazing that in a place like Jerusalem we have 3 Christmases celebrated because we have 3 different Christian calendars in one city? The fact that they came to living together and bridging over those gaps in this way is partially tragic. It's because Christianity has decreased so much in the region in recent years, partially because of persecution and because people have migrated away from the Middle East. But it's also because the families themselves, the grassroots power of wanting a change, wanting to see the communities coming together. They would love to see Christianity united again. The same aspiration that the Pope brought to Jerusalem together with the Patriarch of Constantinople. They were praying together for peace inside Christianity, to bring Christianity together, and that the communities would be able to pray together once more. Jerusalem is the most eschatological place in the world. This is a place that attracts all the stories of the end of days. The apocalypse happens here. At the top of the Mount of Olives is a place where, according to the Jewish tradition, the Messiah would stand at the top of the mountain and there would be a great earthquake. We read about that in the book of Zechariah. And then when you add to that the prophecy of the dry bones, their story of the apocalypse and how the resurrection will start. Today, the Mount of Olives is the largest existing Jewish cemetery in the world. Going back thousands of years, you find remains of people from the time of Jesus, but also 1,000 years beforehand. That's really incredible. Jerusalem is a place where Jesus not only died, but resurrected. That is the most important thing. In Greek, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is not called the Holy Sepulchre. It's not about the death. It's called the Anastasis, the resurrection. It's about the absence of Jesus in that tomb. And the absence makes the promise of God, of resurrection, possible. Jews as well, they are waiting for the promise of resurrection and pray for resurrection constantly. This is one of those links that bring together the three religions, thinking about the promise, thinking about its fulfillment, and the place that Jerusalem play in those questions. You can't really understand one community without studying the other communities. The religious communities, all three of them, are very interlinked in the way they preserve their knowledge and the knowledge of each other.
I'm right above the bazaar. Below me, David Street, which goes all the way up to the Tower of David where we started.
Those old trees tell a story that has been told here originally and continues to be told when people come and visit the sites where those trees still exist. I think that they can relate to that story and to their own relationship with both Christianity and Judaism. The foundation of Christianity on Judaism is so important that we would not be able to understand Christianity otherwise. The contact and the relation to Judaism remains. And it's very, very powerful.
Culture, religion, nationality. These are the foundations of identity, especially in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a meeting point for monotheistic religions. From the early Bronze Age to today, it's a place defined by religion and culture. Marked by the influences of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the cultural practices of Israel have been shaped by these three major religions. Judaism has the oldest roots, dating back to 2000 BC. Out of this tradition, Christianity was born. At its birth, Christianity was an extension of Judaism. Jesus was himself a Jew. His followers considered him a rabbi. The division into a different religious sect came in the 1st century. The people who had adopted the religious views of Jesus were denoted as Christians, which means little Christ. Islam emerged in the 7th century. The tension between Islam and Judaism is one burdened by the past. The Temple Mount is considered a holy place in the Jewish and Islamic religions. That collision of history has caused the culture war surrounding this iconic site, which is home to both the Western Wall and the Dome of the Rock. Jerusalem is a cornerstone of true exchange. This city could not be understood without the connections of these religious groups. They have created a land unlike any other in the Middle East, a place that holds the passing of time in its architecture and its culture, where the pace of its people is shaped by the foundations of 3 very different faiths. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May all who love this city prosper. Psalm 122, verse 6.
Though her history is disputed, Jerusalem's significance cannot be overlooked. She has served as a battleground, a burial ground, and a bedrock for religion and culture. With this foundation, is it any wonder this city has been resurrected time and time again? Though tension and conflict remain the brick and mortar of daily life within Jerusalem's gates, there's no denying that the people living inside are connected by their reverence for this holy place.
I leave you with a psalm penned by King David, a blessing over the city, and indeed a prayer for Israel.
Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. May peace be within your walls, and prosperity within your palaces. For the sake of my brothers and friends, I will now say, may peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your good.